In the world's most dangerous waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, a breaking point everyone thought impossible has finally arrived. The U.S. has dispatched something massive to open this critical passage. Two guided missile destroyers, the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. and the USS Michael Murphy, passed through Hormuz on April 11th, but these ships are only the beginning. Right behind these powerful naval assets came the underwater drones the U.S. deployed into Hormuz waters. CENTCOM officially announced the launch of a mine-clearing operation. However, this transit was anything but quiet. The moment U.S. warships entered the strait, Iranian Revolutionary Guard naval units swiftly tracked them and issued open challenges over radio with "This is the final warning" announcements. While the U.S. side continued on its route, stating compliance with international law and ceasefire rules, it was alleged that an Iranian-directed drone was destroyed by U.S. forces at the height of the tension. Meanwhile, the Tehran administration officially denied the transit and claimed the ships turned back after receiving the warning, declaring to the entire world that it would respond far more harshly to military units in the strait going forward. The timing of this action-packed encounter in Hormuz is especially noteworthy. After exactly 21 hours of talks in Pakistan, parties failed to reach a definitive agreement. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance accused Iran of making a huge mistake, sending important signals about what might be happening behind the scenes. In other words, Washington could be preparing to make its final move with warships and underwater drones to completely unlock Hormuz. Yet right beneath these massive tankers and underwater vehicles, a far more insidious danger waits silently in the dark. Rogue naval mines irregularly laid by Iran, drifting with currents, now at completely unknown locations, lie in wait to trigger a massive catastrophe at any moment. They were laid quickly and irregularly by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy using small boats. A significant portion of these mines were caught in the Gulf's strong bottom currents and drifted miles away from their original positions. Moored contact mines, magnetic and acoustic triggered mines, and drifting mines create an almost invisible and deadly labyrinth throughout the strait. Iran has essentially lost all ability to control the monster it created. The landscape has become completely chaotic. But the fact that two lethal Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. and USS Michael Murphy, bravely navigated this dangerous route and returned shows there is still a glimmer of hope in the region. As part of this critical mission, the U.S. likely did not choose these naval assets at random to unlock the strait. These ships were not ordinary mine hunters. They were floating fortresses equipped with the world's most advanced Aegis combat systems capable of scanning hundreds of miles with their radar networks. Their mission was far greater than a simple cleanup. They were there to establish a new safe transit route in Hormuz and prepare conditions for a safe corridor that would escort merchant ships. The effects of having these missile ships in the strait are already visible, as three massive supertankers became the first examples to cross Hormuz following the ceasefire process, gliding through the Gulf's dangerous waters. The pieces in the strait are shifting significantly, and those rusty locks of the global oil trade might finally be opening one by one. But to say that, Hormuz needs to be cleaned sufficiently to meet conditions fully suitable for international logistics. The real cleanup work will be carried out by high-tech unmanned underwater vehicles, autonomous drones that will be deployed into the waters in the coming days. So where is this process heading? Will we see Hormuz completely cleared of mines and a reliable narrow route that oil ships can complete in about 7 hours? Washington has striking plans regarding this. U.S. President Donald Trump used very sharp language suggesting the real move to fully unlock Hormuz might follow an entirely different plan, saying, "We will open that strait even if we don't use it because we didn't get help from NATO in the world." Trump declared to the whole world just how ready America is for unilateral use of force, meaning America's primary move might not be limited to just sending warships and underwater drones to Hormuz. The real move could come from a completely different doctrine, one that even Iran was caught off guard by, which will lock down the entire region and completely overturn the chessboard. Because right after the collapse of the talks, Donald Trump signaled a chilling doctrine via his personal social media account. The name of this doctrine has been reflected in press coverage as the Blockade. If Iran refuses to fully and safely open the strait it mined and lost control over to international trade, the U.S. Navy could establish its own blockade. This is not just about opening a transit corridor. It means bringing all entrances and exits of Hormuz directly under the initiative of the American Navy. The U.S. plans to establish a structure where it completely eliminates Iran's say over maritime traffic and personally decides which ship can pass and which cannot. This scenario has long ceased to be just an issue between Iran and the U.S. The Strait of Hormuz is the single artery through which roughly 20% of the global oil supply must necessarily pass every day. The clogging of this artery, or turning control over it into a war, has the potential to instantly trigger a massive energy crisis all over the world from Europe to Asia. Europe's already fragile industry could completely collapse under such a shockwave. Behind all these dangerous dynamics, how will Trump's out-blockade operation take shape on the ground? Currently, the U.S. Fifth Fleet stands on alert in the region. The Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, to which the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. is attached, holds massive firepower in and around the Persian Gulf. If war flares up again, F-35s and F-A-18s launching from this aircraft carrier will establish an impenetrable air umbrella over the strait. On the sea surface, cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers will build a wall of steel physically closing the strait's entrance. The first and strongest move on Washington's table will be to open a safe lane in that critical 21-mile narrowing section of the strait with almost surgical precision. To neutralize this insidious threat, lethal knifefish autonomous underwater drones and mine warfare assets operating just beneath the water could silently advance to build an invisible corridor for massive ships. If this first phase succeeds, the first tanker convoys that will relieve the world market will advance under the shadow of the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, and strait traffic could return to normal by 40%. However, if Iran's uncompromising attitude continues, that terrifying out-blockade phase signaled by Trump could surface in all its ruthlessness. Additional Arleigh Burke destroyers, Ticonderoga-class cruisers, and P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft tearing through the sky dispatched to the region. All these powerful military assets could turn Hormuz's entrances and exits into insurmountable checkpoints. At that moment, the U.S. Navy could deploy a plan capable of effectively choking off 70% of Iran's daily oil exports by stopping, searching, and, if necessary, blocking any ship it deems suspicious. If things get even darker on the Middle East chessboard, and by May Iran completely violates the ceasefire and continues its attacks, Washington will not shoulder this massive burden alone. Receiving support from Gulf state logistical bases, the U.S., with the sudden participation of British ship RFA Cardigan Bay and French tripartite-class mine hunters, could transform Hormuz into the operations center of a large-scale international coalition. With the arrival of NATO's standing mine countermeasures groups and Italian Gaeta-class ships to this apocalyptic scene, an uninterrupted air and sea patrol ring also supported by cyber operations might be completed. Even though Europe states its naval assets will participate in mine clearing only after the war is completely ended, Hormuz remaining closed will likely affect the continent very seriously in terms of energy. Furthermore, Trump's pressure on Europe and rhetoric demanding their participation in solving the problem could also significantly impact the EU's strategic stance on this issue. At the end of all these moves, either the safe corridor patiently opened by autonomous devices will let the world economy breathe, or the drifting mines lying in wait in the dark waters of the Gulf will drag the region into an irreversible ring of fire. The risks carried by this potentially planned operation are literally lethal. Iran possesses thousands of suicide drones and hundreds of shore-deployed anti-ship ballistic missiles capable of threatening American ships in the narrow and shallow waters of the Persian Gulf. This asymmetric warfare doctrine, which the Revolutionary Guards have been preparing for years, is built precisely on targeting massive warships in such narrow straits. The narrowest point of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide, and this distance is practically ground zero for modern missiles. While American warships pass through this corridor or enforce the blockade, they may have to react within seconds to sudden missile salvos launched from shore. The possibility of any American warship being hit or the scenario of damage by an unmanned boat could turn this crisis from a regional war into a global catastrophe. The Tehran administration, with the uncompromising attitude it displayed at the negotiation table, is giving the message that it is ready to take this risk. Because at a table where massive issues like nuclear program restrictions, economic sanctions, and the future of the regime are discussed, the only real physical trump card in their hands is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran knows very well that surrendering this trump card would mean paving the way for its own end. Even though there is no mass mobilization to resolve the Hormuz crisis right now, This difficult situation Iran has fallen into and the shaking of global markets are among the most important elements shaping future scenarios. Because the European wing might not sustain the neutrality it maintained through the war's end due to an energy crisis. Oil has skyrocketed to $118 and is still climbing. Insurance premiums have multiplied, ship owners are paying mine risk premiums, and most tankers are still avoiding taking the risk. Global supply chains are shaking, but the real impact goes much deeper, not just Europe. Scenarios regarding Hormuz being closed are pulling the entire global arena under their influence. The Asian geography in particular is suffering the pains of Iran's trump card of closing the strait. Energy giants like China, Japan, South Korea, and India all get the majority of their oil imports through Hormuz. The clogging of the strait directly hits the industrial production of these countries. China's factories are slowing down. Japan's refineries are melting their reserves. South Korea's petrochemical sector is searching for alternative sources. Europe's LNG and oil supply lines depend on the same corridor. Alternative routes exist. The Suez Canal or the Cape of Good Hope are among them, but these routes multiply costs. The Cape of Good Hope route adds 10 days of extra travel with double the fuel cost. Suez is already at capacity and experiencing its own security problems with the Houthi threat. This crisis isn't just about oil. Natural gas, petrochemical products, fertilizer, and plastic raw materials also pass through this corridor. When Hormuz is clogged, it's not only gasoline prices that rise. Every sector, from food to electronics, from agriculture to construction, is affected. Global inflation was already high. The Hormuz crisis turns this into a structural problem. Developing countries are taking the heaviest blow. Economies dependent on energy imports are being dragged into a debt spiral. And if completely clearing the Strait of Mines takes months, which even the most optimistic estimates suggest it will, this economic hemorrhage does not look like it will stop in the short term. Then comes the interesting part. This risky strategy built on mining Hormuz and putting the strait at risk is also striking Iran's own economy. Its oil exports pass through Hormuz, and its own mines are clogging its own source of income. Iran, which exported 1.5 million barrels a day before the war, is now unable to use the vast majority of that capacity. There is also a strategic dimension to this crisis. The clogging of Hormuz fundamentally changed the global energy security debate. The price of depending on a single strait is now before everyone's eyes. Countries have begun pivoting toward alternative energy sources and routes. This process is costly in the short term, but in the long run could reduce the strategic importance of Hormuz. Iran's strategy of using the strait as a trump card is creating a boomerang effect precisely for this reason. The longer it keeps the strait closed, the faster the world searches for alternatives. And Iran's only real trump card permanently loses value. This is where the greatest irony of asymmetric warfare begins. If the weapon you lay to harm your enemy also strikes you in peacetime, it is not a strategy, it is a mistake. Right in the shadow of this massive strategic mistake, a single global actor is silently and with great satisfaction watching all this chaos and even emerging as the most profitable from this crisis: Russia. While the Tehran administration falls into the pit it dug itself, losing both its economy and its geopolitical credibility, Moscow is using the panic atmosphere created by this asymmetric war almost like a life preserver. Crushed under Western sanctions and having spent billions of dollars building a massive shadow fleet to sustain its energy exports, Russia might be experiencing its golden age thanks to the congestion in Hormuz. Barrel prices exceeding $118 and the supply panic in global markets have effectively trashed the price cap the West placed on Russian oil. European and Asian markets are forced to bend or ignore sanctions out of necessity to keep their industries running and satisfy their energy hunger. The billions of dollars of hot money flowing into the Kremlin's coffers are well on their way to redirecting the country's military-industrial complex. But Russia's gain in this crisis is not just an instantaneous spike in oil prices. There is a much deeper long-term geopolitical dimension that will redraw the global map. The Strait of Hormuz turning into an unreliable death trap and alternative routes multiplying costs might work to Moscow's advantage in a different sense, because this crisis might suddenly be turning the Northern Sea Route project, which Russia has invested trillions of rubles into for years, into one of the world's most attractive and necessary alternatives. This massive corridor connecting Asia and Europe via the Arctic Ocean runs on an uninterrupted transit line entirely independent of the Middle East's rogue mines and suicide drones. This situation might not only earn Moscow massive transit fees from paths it opens with nuclear icebreakers. Putin, taking advantage of this, could acquire very different and substantial financial resources for his war in Ukraine. This is exactly how the Kremlin could benefit from Europe failing to align with the U.S. on a common step regarding resolution of the Strait of Hormuz crisis. Of course, there is also the military dimension. The Russians got the chance to test how much American military capacity can be stretched globally. The Kremlin, together with Beijing, is constantly monitoring all naval and air force elements and troop movements in the Middle East. The fact that a significant portion of U.S. deterrence in the Pacific and Europe is obligatorily concentrated in a narrow and dangerous gulf seriously expands Russia's maneuvering room in other conflict zones. This dilemma works to the advantage of both Moscow and Beijing. They are observing U.S. military capabilities in the Middle East, and in a potential clash situation, these observations could pose a massive risk factor. Looking at this entire picture from a wide angle, it becomes clear that this suicide strategy, which Iran views as its own struggle for survival and launched with hope for a grand asymmetric victory, is actually part of a much bigger game. While Tehran thinks it is defying the U.S. and locking down the global system at the cost of cutting its own lifeline, it is actually merely playing the role of an apparatus that strengthens Moscow's hand. While the mines it laid in its own sea drag Iran into an irreversible economic collapse in the international arena, the plans of Moscow and Beijing, who watch this deadly game with cold-blooded calculation, are operating very differently. Therefore, the support that might come from the EU or different regions for this critical operation the U.S. started to open Hormuz is vital in terms of shifting dynamics in the region and making sea lanes reliable again. It seems essential that a joint international effort be made so that the threats in the Strait of Hormuz do not remain solely in the hands of the Tehran regime and do not turn into a trump card that Moscow and Beijing can exploit. So what do you think about this issue? We are waiting for your comments. Thank you for choosing us.